Hey Fae folk, welcome and welcome back. So for today's video, we are doing something a little bit different. You will have seen the title. Today, we are debunking Monster High myths. Now, I do think it's just kind of the nature of the internet that like things are going to get spread around and people are going to start believing things that aren't true. I mean, even pre-internet, obviously that was a thing. Like rumors have always been a thing, but within the Monster High fandom, maybe it's just because I'm like super entrenched in the Monster High fandom, definitely more so than like any other doll line, but I feel like there are a lot of misconceptions within the Monster High fandom across all of the different generations, just things that are widely held beliefs that like people think are true and they're just not ultimately at the end of the day. So I thought it would be fun and interesting and maybe a little bit controversial to do a video where I tried to tackle some of those myths and kind of myth busted them. I did ask you guys on the community tab here to kind of like tell me some common misconceptions that you have seen within the fandom, and then there are also some that like I've seen myself that I wanted to address. So that is what we are going to be doing today. I will be starting out, I think the way I want to organize this is kind of like leading up to the more controversial myths. So we're going to start out really, really light, and then it's going to get a little bit more heavy and like slightly more opinionated towards the end. So grab your popcorn, I guess. I do expect that this one might be a little bit long. I know there's at least one time I'm going to end up ranting, so hopefully that will be fun for you guys. But yeah, like I said, lots to get through, so let's go ahead and just get on started. Alrighty, so myth number one, like I said, we are starting out very low stakes, and this is actually one that I didn't even know about. Like, I had bought into the misconception. So, like, I guess that's also important to say is that I'm not coming at this from a place of being like up on my high horse, like, I never make mistakes and you all are fools. Like, that's not it. I literally didn't even know this one. So, like, I'm learning too with this. It's not anything where I'm like trying to be preachy or anything like that. So, kind of extra disclaimer. But anyway, the myth revolves around the Cleo and Ghoulia 2-pack collector set. I have referenced this on the channel before, mostly with the Cleo. Like, sorry, Ghoulia fans. I mostly just like don't talk about the Ghoulia just because like the Cleo to me is the highlight of this pack. I think she's such a gorgeous doll. Like, she's one that I've referenced as being like a grail of mine. But I have in the past called this the SDCC set, and that is in fact technically not true. According to dollact.net, this set was originally designed to be the San Diego Comic-Con set for, I believe it was 2017. However, the brand didn't end up like showing out at Comic-Con because that was like kind of when they went kaput. So this set just got released as like a regular collector's release with Mattel. So technically speaking, originally planned to be an SDCC set, but it never actually was. So like I said, this is one that I actually didn't know about, and I have definitely always referred to this as the SDCC Cleo, because like I said, I usually talk about the Cleo. So yeah, my bad on that one. Glad for the person who pointed this out to clarify it to not only me, but now I can share that with you guys. This second myth is also one that I was just completely unaware of. Like, I just never had heard it before, but again, you guys brought it up. So apparently it's a common enough misconception. So we are here to clear that up. And the myth is that Ghoulia Yelps from G1 of Monster High is related to Monica Decay from Gen 2 of Monster High. And that is not the case. Interestingly, this is like where people get tripped up, is that Ghoulia apparently does have an older sister who's like already graduated from Monster High, and her name is Monica Yelps. So like, having two characters who are zombies named Monica, it totally makes sense that there would be some misunderstanding there. But Monica Decay is a completely separate character, separate last name and everything. And also, like, the G1 canon and the G2 canon are like not connected. I mean, G2, the whole media for that literally kind of restarts and they like reframe how Monster High came to be and everything like that. So they are completely disconnected. And if you look on the Monster High wiki for the list of G2 characters, Ghoulia isn't even listed. So like, her and Monica Yelps, no, sorry. I just did it myself. That's crazy that I literally did that on camera. Ghoulia Yelps and Monica Decay are like not even characters that exist within the same canon. So again, I do understand, I literally just slipped up and did it myself, why there is some confusion there, because they did use the name Monica twice. It probably is just one of those things where it's like a good pun for a zombie name. So they were like, we want a new zombie character for G2. Let's go ahead and reuse this pun, because it's not like Monica, I don't even think she ever gets screen time. I think she's just kind of vaguely referenced maybe in the diaries or in the books. But like, as far as the webisodes and movies, she's not even like seen in G1. Monica Yelps isn't even seen. So they're probably like, oh yeah, we can get away with reusing the name. So has led to some confusion. Obviously, again, this is like not a high stakes myth, but just to clear it up, Ghoulia Yelps, Monica Decay, no relationship whatsoever. Next myth we're going to be discussing is the idea that Frankie in G3 is non-binary because of the very nature of being a Frankenmonster. That is to say that they have that gender because they are stitched together from different parts of different people and also different machinery, and so that's why they're non-binary. And this just like isn't true. It's not stated anywhere that I could find by any of like the creators or anything like that that was their thought process behind G3 Frankie. I do think, I guess you could make the argument that like, because here's the thing, I think G3 Frankie is non-binary because they just wanted to have like some sort of representation, and I think that's honestly a good enough reason to make a character non-binary. You definitely could theorize that the reason it's Frankie specifically is because of that. However, the person who submitted this myth made a point that I do think is really, really important and like I want to touch on. And that is just the idea that people don't have to have a reason to be non-binary. So like maybe in a like meta sense, if you're thinking about the fact that this is media designed by someone, it is possible. It's not confirmed. Like I said, anywhere that I could find, it's not confirmed, but it is possible that that was kind of the thought process for making Frankie specifically non-binary. But in universe, people don't need a reason to be non-binary. Frankie doesn't have to be non-binary just because they're made up of different parts. They just as easily could decide that they identify as a woman or a man or whatever the case might be. Like, that ultimately doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm non-binary myself, and it's not because of anything. It's not like because of an event or my genetics or whatever. Like, that's just how I feel. It just kind of is. And so I did want to like highlight this one again because, like I said, the person who commented this was saying that it is kind of harmful to think that there needs to be a reason for someone to experience their gender in a certain way. And there just doesn't. Like, again, fine to theorize in like a meta sense, but like within the universe, Frankie just is non-binary. They don't have to have a reason for it. They don't have to have any justification for it, because I do think like reason and justification can get like dangerously mixed. Not always, but like can get kind of dangerously mixed. Frankie doesn't have to have any of that. They just are non-binary and they're happy about it, and that's enough. With this next myth, we are starting to dip our toes into slightly more serious topics. It's still nothing like crazy, but we're just starting to get there. So this myth is that Gen 1 Laguna is canonically Aboriginal Australian, and that is not true. She is obviously Australian, but nowhere in like the diaries or the media or anything like that does it say she's Aboriginal specifically. Of course, this is like a very, very common headcanon, and that's perfectly fine. I personally really, really like the idea as well. It's absolutely harmless for you to like canon her that way in your head, but I'm only clarifying that that is not like strictly canon. It's kind of just a popular fan theory, I guess would be the best way to put it. And the only reason I'm bringing this up and like clarifying, because again, absolutely no harm, no foul to headcanon her as that. But we're going to see as we go through the rest of these myths that a very common theme is myths where like very common fan theories and headcanons are said to be strictly true and strictly canon in Gen 1, specifically of Monster High. And it leads to this overarching problem, which again, we are going to touch on later, that people get this conception that Gen 1 of Monster High was significantly more diverse and representative than it actually was, because the fans kind of did a lot of the work to make it that way. So again, nothing wrong with like headcanoning Laguna as being Aboriginal. Again, I like that idea, but unfortunately it's not something that was ever confirmed in the canon. We are definitely getting a little bit more dicey with this one, and it does kind of follow that trend that I was discussing with the previous myth. So this myth is that Gen 1 Ghoulia is canonically nonverbal, and honestly, it kind of couldn't be further from the truth. In Gen 1, Ghoulia speaks zombie language like all of the other zombies do. This is a language that like she's explicitly stated to be speaking, and the other characters do understand her. So even though to us, the audience, she's kind of speaking in noises and moans and groans, within the canon of Monster High, she is speaking an actual proper language. She's not like just making sounds. She is like actively speaking. It's just like not English like the other characters speak. And this one is really, really difficult because again, this is one that is like a headcanon that kind of got blown out of proportion, I guess might be the best way to put it. Not that that's like inherently a negative thing, but this is something that just a lot of people headcanon about Ghoulia. And so it's like some people end up believing that that is what the media was intended to represent, and it's not. And this one I think is a little bit harder than the Laguna myth that we just talked about, because there's no harm whatsoever in headcanoning that Laguna is Aboriginal, right? Like that's not hurting anybody. However, I do think that there's like a bit more nuance with this Ghoulia one, because on the one hand, I do think that it's quite rare to find nonverbal representation in media, and even more so than that, representation for nonverbal people that is positive or at least like neutral. Like if Gulia was canonically nonverbal, everyone around her like wouldn't, like if nothing else changed with the canon of Monster High in Gen 1, everyone around her wouldn't be like bothered by that. Like it wouldn't be a big deal. And I do think that that's nice representation in theory, to have someone who doesn't communicate with words and no one around them makes a big deal of it. It's just kind of how they are, and that's normal and fine and perfect. I like that concept. So like I want to like that. Like I want to be chill with that. And I do understand. I mean, I'm obviously not nonverbal. Like I'm yapping a lot on camera. So it's hard for me to say because I don't experience that personally, right? Like so I don't want to step on any toes. And I understand why if someone is more nonverbal, they might see themselves in Gulia and feel represented by that. So I don't want to say that that's inherently harmful. However, on the flip side, because she does canonically speak a literal language, it does kind of feel like if you put that in a real world situation, it would be weird. Like if I were to talk about a French person who's speaking French and be like, oh, well, I don't understand French. Like, I don't know what any of these sounds mean. They don't sound like words to me. They must be nonverbal. That's kind of messed up, right? Like that's kind of a weird thing to do and like a weird thing to say. Or even like you could make the argument that like French is more recognizable. I'm going to forget. I should have written it down. But I know there's like a tribe in Africa that has a like clicking language that I think is maybe the most comparable that I'm aware of, just in the sense that it is compared to like Western cultures or more like European languages. It's very, very different. That's not to say that it's lesser. Like I'm not trying to like shit on them, obviously. I'm just saying it's like a different sound than a lot of people are used to hearing. But even then, like that would be kind of messed up of me to hear a clicking language and be like, oh, these people are nonverbal because I don't comprehend that as words. Because just because I don't see it as words doesn't mean that it's not words or like a legitimate language or anything like that. So I do think this one's just like a little bit more complicated as far as where I stand on it, because again, I completely understand wanting representation and people seeing themselves in Gulia and like seeing her as kind of nonverbal representation. But on the other hand, again, if you put that in a real world scenario, if you were to call any actual language like, oh, those people are nonverbal because they're speaking something I don't understand, a little bit weird. So yeah, complicated thoughts on this, but the point of this is just to say that it is a myth that it's canon. She definitely does speak a language. It's just not English within Gen 1 of Monster High, so her being nonverbal canonically is definitely a myth. Okay, so from here on out in the video, we are going to be doing a lot of comparing, just because I do feel like a lot of myths around Monster High and within the Monster High fandom do kind of run along the divide between G1 and G3 Monster High fans. We're kind of just ignoring G2 with this. And it is going to sound like I am being extremely defensive of G3. And in a sense I am, but it's not pointlessly so. I always like say, or like whenever we try to like discuss differences between the generations, I always try to make it clear that you are absolutely allowed to not like G3 of Monster High. Like I personally love it. I would say it's probably my favorite generation, even though I did start collecting with G1 of Monster High. So like that is kind of my bias if you want to take that into account. But I think there are different reasons to dislike G3 that are more like valid than others. Like if your primary reason for hating G3 is that you don't like that some of the characters are curvier, that's not that you think G1 is better. That's just that you don't like fat people. Like, so some things I just don't think are realistic reasons to like G3. And so I just want to go into this like with that extra disclaimer and that preface saying that it's going to sound very much like I am trying to like defend G3 to the bitter end, but I'm not going to be trying to say it's perfect. I know full well that G3 has its flaws. I just know that there are also a lot of myths surrounding like Gen 1 versus Gen 3, like comparison type myths that I just don't think are true. So I wanted to clear those up. So again, you are absolutely allowed to not like G3. I guess what I'm saying is like, dislike it. Like you can dislike it all you want. You can say you think the dolls are ugly, the redesigns are ugly, whatever. But I think that there are problematic reasons for disliking it. And I also think that sometimes people just like flat out lie about the comparisons between G1 and G3 to try to make G3 seem worse. So that's kind of what we are tackling. So just extra disclaimer there, I guess. With all of that being said, the next myth is that G3 has inherently worse quality across the board than Gen 1 of Monster High. And this is where I need to say, I'm not trying to say that G3 is like the epitome of quality, absolutely perfect, like dolls. That's not what I'm trying to say. Like, I love them a lot. I also understand that they do have a lot of problems. G3 has several dolls that use polypropylene, notably the Skulltimate Secrets lines, or like poor Abby always gets polypropylene hair, which is kind of widely known, I guess, or like almost universally, really, from what I've seen online, considered the worst hair fiber. It degrades faster. People don't like how it like behaves on a doll's head. So that's a point against G3. They definitely do have some dolls that have fabrics that are worse, or they have like a lack of painted details in some of their accessories. So yeah, sometimes G3 is worse quality than other Monster High dolls, like other G1 Monster High dolls. However, it's not like G1 was always perfect either. They definitely also had releases where the fabric was maybe not the best quality. They did tend to have more painted details overall, but that wasn't always the case. Also, like a big one that I want to point out, and the one of you guys also pointed out, was that G1 is notorious for having wonky eyes. And of course, there are definitely G3 dolls that like get misprinted and just like have weird looking eyes. It's not to say that they're always perfect in the face either, but I feel like G1 is kind of like, it's almost like a joke how bad some of the faces were and how bad some of the screenings were. And then also when you just compare the bodies, obviously it's harder to do now because like the G1 dolls are older and time degrades bodies. But if you kind of remember opening a G1 doll when they were first coming out, because of the thinness of their bodies and like maybe the materials, I don't know exactly what was going on there, they did feel more delicate. Whereas a big thing that I liked and that a lot of other people really liked when G3 came out was that the bodies feel sturdy. Even the skinnier dolls, like I'm not just saying like G1 Draculaura versus G3 Draculaura because like G3 Drac has a curvier body type, so you might be like, oh, that's why they're sturdy. But even characters who are like almost as tiny as they were in Gen 1 of Monster High, just something about the way these dolls are built feels sturdier. It feels safer to play with them. It feels safer to move them around a lot or be a little bit rougher with them. They just don't feel quite as delicate. So all of that to say that like you can argue either way. Each generation does have their problems quality wise. If you are a huge hair person, you're probably going to like G3 less in like terms of quality because they use polypropylene more. But like if you are a big like pose person and you like your dolls to be really, really sturdy, you might prefer G3 over G1 because the G1 bodies like can pose perfectly well, but they just feel a little bit more delicate, like I said before. So I do think that this one kind of comes down to preference and what you value most in a doll in terms of quality. But I do think it's just silly to say that overall, every single G3 doll is like worse quality than every single G1 doll. That's the myth that I'm really trying to like bust here. That's just ultimately not true. Both generations have dolls that were really strong and dolls that were really like not so strong, and just overall facets that are strong or a little bit weaker. So I do think that it is a myth to say that G3 is terrible and worse across the board quality wise. Sometimes yes, always definitely not. Next myth, kind of similar vibes here, and that is that G3 reuses way too many silhouettes and like clothing molds, and like they're just very, very repetitive. And I guess this one I can't like necessarily completely bust because it is true in a sense. We have gotten so many high-waisted shorts, and like I love high-waisted shorts, but I do get that it gets boring to see it over and over and over and over again. And the like accessory wise, I know there's several examples, but I think for me the most notorious is there's one shoe mold that Draculaura has gotten so many times over and over again. So like, yeah, G3 does reuse silhouettes and reuses accessory molds. What I'm trying to get at with this myth is again that people will try to say this as a way to like put G3 down and lift G1 up. And it's not just saying like, oh, I'm kind of like bummed about this. It's like, oh, G3 sucks because they reuse molds and silhouettes. And so that's really the myth that I'm busting because, again, that's not a problem that's unique to G3. And for this one, I pulled up examples, okay? I came with receipts. That's going to be the case for a couple of these here. So first example that I came up with was the dead tired dolls. Just across the board, there are a lot of dead tired dolls, and all of them have almost the same or exactly the same slipper mold. Sometimes they have like slight differences. Like I think some of Draculaura's have like little bat wings on them, but a lot of them are the exact same slipper mold across all of the dolls. But like you could argue that there are some changes. So instead, let's look at a particular shoe mold that I personally have seen all over with G1. The first instance that I personally found it, not like chronologically, just as I was scrolling through a Monster High database to get these images, is in this Claudine fashion pack. Which, side note, this is a really cute fashion pack, but let's focus on the shoes here. So if you're looking at the shape of those shoes and everything, they do recolor these shoes, but they release them so often. You can see them in this Monster Maker Create a Monster pack. I know the picture isn't like the best, but it's the black shoes that are right under the kind of like gray skinned monster, like right in there and kind of in the middle of the picture. They're the same shoe mold and everything. You also see them in this Abby fashion pack. They have been changed to be purple, but it's the same shoe mold. Also, notably in this Abby fashion pack, this bag that she has is Spectra's like core dolls bag. So this is kind of a double whammy for reusing the same mold. In this Claudine and Howleen 2-pack, Claudine is wearing these same shoes over again. And like, this was just a cursory glance. Like, this was just me kind of vaguely going through a database trying to find these shoes. And I found them this many times. There might be more instances. And also, these shoes aren't the only time that Gen 1 did this. So again, I'm not trying to say that G3 doesn't do this or that it isn't irritating that maybe G3 does this or anything like that, but it's not unique. And I mean, that's just like the molds, right? Talking about the silhouettes, G1 is notorious for just having mini dresses. So like, maybe G3 is notorious for high-waisted shorts, but again, it's not a problem that's unique to this current generation. It's something that Monster High has always done. And ultimately, it's like budget saving, right? Like if they use a very similar silhouette, they don't have to put as much effort in to like redoing patterns or anything like that. If they're using the exact same shoe mold and just recoloring it, they don't have to create a new mold for shoes. So like, this ultimately is just Mattel and Monster High trying to like cut costs a little bit so that their profits can be bigger. So that's the real thing that's going on here. But the point I'm trying to like make is that this isn't a like just G3 problem, and it's not something that I think is fair necessarily to criticize G3 for, in the sense of if you're trying to compare them. If you just don't like it, that's fine. But like, you can't claim that G1 wasn't doing the exact same shit 10 years ago. Okay, we're getting into the big guns here. This is going to be rant number 1. So we'll have at least 2 rants this video because the last myth is really where I'm going to pop off. But the current myth that I want to talk about is that G3 is like too cutesy and disgusting, and G1 was excellent because it was super gothic and super edgy. And this already is like opening such a can of worms because like, what do you mean when you say gothic? Right? Like there are so many subgenres of goth. Like you have gothic Lolita, you've got like trad goth, you have cyber goth. Like these are all, I mean, that's even just like 3 out of so many. Like there's so many different types of like proper gothic subcultures, but then also people who aren't like deeply invested in the subculture or who just like don't know the terms as much, which I'm not judging you, by the way, if you like don't know that. But a lot of the times people who aren't as familiar with subcultures will look at anyone wearing a lot of black and be like, oh, that's goth. Like even some people might look at what I'm wearing today and be like, that's goth, where I wouldn't really call it that. Like emo, scene, punk, all of those things can, by certain people, kind of get lumped into like the gothic label just because there might be a lot of black involved. And again, I'm not trying to like shit on anybody out there who might be watching this who doesn't know those terms. That's fine if you don't know those terms. I'm just saying that's already like a difficult thing to define because it's like, oh yeah, Gen 1 was super gothic, but like, what exactly is it that you mean by gothic? So with this, I also have examples that I wanted to go with, because even if you just use the umbrella term of gothic as being like anything kind of dark or edgy, I guess edgy is like really the word that I want to hone in on. If you want to just say Monster High's edgy in G1 and G3 isn't, I still don't necessarily think that that's super accurate. So let's go ahead and look at some dolls that I personally think are pretty cute, like are kind of just as cutesy as G3 dolls. This first one is the Gloom Beach Draculaura, especially in the face. I wanted to highlight this because like, I think some people are more inclined to be like, okay, yeah, maybe the fashion wasn't, but the faces were super gothic. You cannot convince me that this Draculaura is gothic in the face. She's got a baby pink lip, a heart on her cheek, and like thick eyelashes. Like that's not goth. Not necessarily. I think that's just kind of like normal cutesy makeup. And even her outfit, like realistically speaking, she's wearing black on her swimsuit. but like she's also got a lot of pink and yellow and hearts and bows. And like, yes, sometimes bows can be elements of certain goth subcultures. Again, I really should be using the term edgy. Just like alternative maybe is a good one too. Like alternative maybe, but like it's not that much like more edgy or anything like that than a G3 doll. Keeping going on down here, signature Claudine. This is a normal outfit. Like you can buy this anywhere. She's just wearing like a ruffled skirt, a tank top. I think this is a tank top. I don't have this doll or like any of her reproductions, but I think this is a tank top and a jacket with fur. And then like chunky shoes. I guess maybe you could be like, oh, the shoes being super chunky is like the most alternative element of this outfit. But even that, I feel like maybe. But this is a normal outfit. Like, this is just a regular person's outfit. Same thing with the signature Laguna. Like, yes, there is a lot of black on it, but just because it does have black in the outfit does not automatically make it a super alternative outfit. Like, ultimately speaking, this is a swimsuit and like sporty shorts and a sporty jacket. The colors are maybe more muted than people are used to with dolls. Like, Barbie tends to be like significantly brighter pink. But just because it's a muted pink does not automatically make it super alternative. Going back to another member of the Wolf family, I think I actually have a couple more on here. I do, yeah. So, older sister Claudia Wolf, like this. First of all, like I'm not trying to like say this in a bad way. Like I'm not saying these dolls are ugly because they're not edgy, but for certain companies, this is straight up business attire. Like it's kind of fun business attire, but she's wearing a mini dress, not even like that mini, like it's not that short realistically. She's wearing a dress and a blazer. Like you're sitting here like all G1 dolls are gothic wear. I'm so sorry. Like I'm not trying to be an ass, but come on. And that Howleen, even younger sister of the Wolf family, we're just going through all the Wolf siblings here. Again, there's a lot of black in this, and it's one of the more alternative examples that I have here, but I still wouldn't call it like wholly alternative. There's a lot of like very vibrant colors and very what I would say like normal silhouettes and patterns. Like this is just kind of like a motorcycle jacket. So many people wear motorcycle jackets and not all of them are like alternative dressing folks. Then we go down, I have like a lot of examples for this. I was getting kind of in my feelings about this. Viperine Gorgon. Like this is just a normal dress. Outside of her shoes being very snaky molded, like she's wearing ultimately mostly a floral dress with a ruffle at the bottom and a statement necklace. Is that statement necklace snakes? Yes. But is that really enough to make this like a truly deeply alternative, gothic, edgy outfit? I don't think so. I don't think that eradicates the straight up daisies on her dress. And again, that's not to say that you can't dress alternative and have daisies. I'm just saying like I I don't think this is that intense. And then lastly, no, I lied. I've got a couple more that I wanted to talk about. I really thought I was done. I think this is the I Heart Shoes Cleo. And I would say that none of Cleo's dolls are like truly alternative. They're all very inspired by like ancient Egyptian type fashion. Like that's obviously what she's going for. She's a mummy. So they almost they don't read costumey. Like I'm not trying to say that, but like they read closer to being more of a costume than being gothic. You know what I'm saying? Like this is bright blue or like bright teal. There's not even like really any black outside of her purse that she's got going on here in her hair. I don't know. And then lastly, lastly, the Dawn of the Dance Frankie, maybe a little bit more alternative than is like the norm. But I still don't know that I would say this is insanely alternative. Like she's just wearing a little like bolero with puff sleeves. The dress is the most alternative part unless you count the hot pink fishnets. I don't know. I just don't think this is that alternative. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe my like scale is skewed, but this doesn't feel that wild to me. My camera decided to quit on me there for a second, so I gotta like refine where I was at in my little rant. I'm giving all these examples. That's not to say that there weren't any G1 dolls that were more alternative or more gothic. Ones that come to mind are like the Core Spectre doll. That doll was like much more dark. She did have a very dark color scheme. There were a lot of like chains and stuff. And especially in the face mold was like so sunken, so ghostly. That feels more alternative inherently to me. Or like the Monster High Cupid doll that we got. Even for a Cupid doll, which like you kind of automatically, I feel like, think pinks and reds because Valentine's Day, but she did have a lot of black and like lace in her design. And again, black doesn't automatically equal gothic, but I do think the way that it was implemented felt more alternative. Plus, she had the bone wings, like that's kind of crazy. That definitely feels more alternative and like closer to being some sort of gothic to me. But not every doll was like that. And the same can definitely be said for G3. There are dolls that feel much more cutesy and dolls that feel a little bit more alternative. So again, we're just looking at this and being like, it's not that it's not sometimes true, but it's not always true that G1 was significantly edgier and significantly more quote unquote gothic than G3. I do want to just like speculate for a second outside of people just like wanting to hate G3. I do think that maybe the reason it feels like G1 was like vastly more gothic is just because that was really the first time that people were seeing this in a very, very widespread fashion doll, like marketed to kids sort of line. I I know there are lines like Living Dead dolls or like the B-Goths. I don't know the exact timeline on those, but it's possible that they existed like pre-Monster High or even other brands that I'm not familiar with. So I'm not trying to say Monster High was the first edgy doll line literally ever, or even just like the first edgy doll literally ever. But I do think that they were extremely unique in the sense of being, again, so widespread and especially being marketed to kids. Like they weren't really, I mean, they were loved by collectors obviously, and they did make some collector dolls, but they were also marketed to kids. And so I think that just because that was like the first instance of that, that it makes G1 feel more edgy in comparison to G3, because at this point G3 is like building off of that, where it's like, okay, this isn't the first time we're seeing this anymore, so it almost feels like they have to live up to a higher standard, if that makes sense. Because like if you're existing in a world that is full of like primarily like Barbie or Bratz or like Disney dolls, stuff like that, where it's like either very, very bright and like kind of more kiddish, or kind of just like everyday, like not necessarily super like edgy or anything like that, then yeah, of course Monster High Gen 1 coming on the scene is gonna feel really extreme in comparison. But then when you exist in the world where G1 has already existed and we've already seen like other lines like Bratzillas or Novi Stars try to do some more like weird out there stuff that might be like more alternative. Again, I feel like I'm reusing that word so many times. I'm sorry, but I just like can't think of a better word for it. Then yeah, G3 is going to inherently feel less edgy because by comparison, it's not as like new and shocking. I hope that makes sense. And again, like that might not be even true or like 100% of the thing. That's kind of my theory. Again, outside of people just wanting to shit on G3, I feel like that might be why it's like something where we remember G1 as being a lot more alternative than it actually was, because it was by comparison. And now G3 is like the same thing, I guess. I hope that makes sense. Hope that gets across. But the whole point that I'm trying to make is much like the quality issue, there are dolls from both generations that feel more alternative, dolls that don't feel so alternative. And it's fine. That's fine. Monster High is allowed to be cute. Monster High is also allowed to be edgy. All of these things can be true at once for multiple generations. Alrighty, so this last myth is where I'm like really gonna kind of go in, and I have a lot of feelings to get through. And this is the one that I alluded to earlier, which is the myth that Gen 1 of Monster High was just this pinnacle of diversity and had tons of representation, both in terms of race and in terms of sexuality. And it's, again, not that that's not always true, not that they weren't diverse in some ways, not even necessarily, like I wasn't super tuned into other dolls when Monster High G1 was like first being introduced. So maybe compared to other doll lines, they were significantly more diverse. However, I do think that people remember them as being a lot more diverse and like a lot more appropriately diverse than was actually true. So as I said, I see this with race and then also with sexuality. So we're going to tackle both of those. When it comes to like the race, I do want to say bringing G3 into this for a minute, because again, this is like something that I feel like people use to be upset about G3. I know that a lot of people are upset that a lot of the characters changed races or kind of became mixed race. And I honestly think a lot of that is people just hating change. And like that's valid. I also don't like change all the time. Like sometimes it's hard to accept. I get it. Like I'm not trying to be mean by saying that. But again, this comes down to you're allowed to dislike G3, but there's no point in fucking lying about it. I see people post online complaining about the fact that G3 Draculaura is Taiwanese, and they're like, why would they remove her Romanian like heritage? And they didn't. Like she's both. She's half Taiwanese. I think it's her mom. Yeah, her mom is Taiwanese, and then her dad, Dracula, is Romanian. So like she's half Romanian, half Taiwanese. She is still Romanian. They didn't erase that culture from her. They just like expanded upon it and also gave her like another bit of heritage there. So stuff like that is just, again, why are you lying? Like you can dislike G3 without having to lie about it. The only like main cast character out of like the main like core group of characters that fully changed races is Laguna. And we are going to like talk about her quite extensively in a minute here, so like bear with me. But obviously she went from being Australian in Gen 1 to being Latina in G3. And I do understand being upset about that, about the loss of the Australian representation, especially if you did headcanon her is Aboriginal, because like I understand that that's not representation that you necessarily see a lot. So I'm not trying to say you're not allowed to feel upset about that. From what I understand, the reason for the change was because the like creature that she's inspired by, and like the reason her name is Laguna is because she was inspired by the creature of the Black Lagoon, who apparently hails from like the Amazon rainforest basin. So that's why they decided to make G3 Laguna Latina. The other thing there that I have seen some people say in terms of like positively enjoying the fact that Laguna is Latina is that she's from Honduras, and a lot of the time in media, any Latina representation tends to just like automatically be Mexican. And that's not to say that it's bad to have Mexican representation. Obviously, that's wonderful to see too, but it is just like kind of less common to have another country or another nationality like shouted out like that. And so I can understand again why people are upset about the change, and especially like it being a complete shift. But I can also kind of see the reasonings behind that. Now I know there are other problems with Laguna. We are going to touch on that in a second, I promise. Like I'm not just trying to ignore that. I just want to kind of like get through some other things first. So once again, consulting my notes here, because again, we've talked about like the change being something that people aren't a big fan of. But I also think that part of this problem is that people are misremembering and misrepresenting G1 as being very, very appropriately diverse. It's not that they weren't diverse. Like they did definitely have a lot of diversity and sometimes a lot of good diversity, but they also had a lot of like really bad diversity. First example that comes to mind is Marisol from the like Monster Exchange line. She's a perfect example. I have talked about her fairly recently. I can't remember exactly which video it was, but her last name, like the last name literally given to this character as her name, is a slur for native Brazilians. So like, is she Brazilian representation? Technically, but like not in a good way. Like that's actually fucking insane of them to give her a slur as last name. And I would really love to believe that whoever did it didn't know. But also, like, you should be looking into that if you're designing this. And, like, I don't know, that's just kind of messed up. So, representative, yeah, but like not in a good way. We've talked about Genifire before, especially like because of the G3 Genifire that came out. I feel like I've talked about this a lot, but some people didn't really love her skin tone and felt like it was too close to yellow. And then also the fact that she is like a very fire themed dragon, whereas Chinese dragons typically are more associated with water. So like that's kind of another thing where maybe it's not as intense as having a slur for a last name, but it's like not perfect and super accurate representation either. We also have Abby, who is from the Himalayas. And I did double check just because I really wanted to like know what I was talking about this. It does say specifically on the Monster High Wiki for G1 Abby that she hails from the Himalayas, but she has an extremely strong Russian accent, which I do want to side note and say, like, I understand that like in real life, people can grow up in one area or like have heritage from one area and end up having a different accent just because of like different situations that might happen. I understand that. But that's real life. And we do talk sometimes on this channel about how real life and dolls are like different. Mostly I talk about it in terms of style, where I'm like, real people can obviously have like tens of thousands of different styles that they want to pull from in their closet, and like, who cares? Have fun. But with a doll, it's nice to have more consistency with style. Like, we're talking about Monster High, so we'll talk about that. If Rebecca Steam suddenly wasn't wearing anything that was steampunk inspired, like, it would feel weird and out of character for her, even though for a human it would be like, oh yeah, you didn't feel like dressing steampunk today, that's fine. So yeah, okay, in real life, that sort of situation where you have heritage from one place and have a different accent can happen. No shade to those people. But for a doll that is supposed to be representing a culture, having her accent, her very, very heavy accent, no shade to heavy accent havers, but like, it's very obvious, be different from the culture she's supposed to be representing is not necessarily super duper. Icy Dawn Dancer has been very divisive. I've talked about her before because she does seem to be kind of an amalgamation of different Native American styles and maybe some stereotypes. And some people, especially like who actually aren't Native American, don't really care. They're like, well, I'll take something over nothing. Some people don't like the fact that it's not very accurate. I can't really speak on that as a white person, but the fact that there's even a question is like, okay, it obviously isn't like necessarily the best representation if there's a debate going on about it, right? And then even like talking about 13 Wishes, that movie, the entire movie is like a whole discussion on Orientalism. Like, we could get into that for a whole separate video. So again, I'm saying all this and I'm not trying to shit on G1, because to bring it back to G3 Laguna, some people really do not like her. She kind of reminds me a little bit of Icy in that sense, where some people are like, no, I actually love this Laguna. Like, I feel just like her. I feel like she's great representation. And some people are like, she is a walking Latina stereotype and I hate it. And I, again, white person, don't get to weigh in on who's right on that. But that's just to say that I know that G3 does not always do representation right as well. Again, much like Icy, if there's a debate, maybe Laguna could have been tweaked a little bit so that people didn't feel like she was so much of a stereotype. So this isn't to say that G3 is like perfect racial representation, everything is wonderful, but it is just to say that G1 was not necessarily as diverse as people remember it to be. And even the representation that it did have was often flawed. So that means that we get to dive into the G1 was like super diverse in terms of sexuality issue. And I have so many feelings about this, and I know they're unpopular, and I have ranted about it before, but by God, I'm going to do it again, because honestly, this pisses me off. So let's be like so for real and so clear for a second. When it comes to the like G1 media, specifically dolls, diaries, I forgot the word webisodes for a second. Webisodes, movies. I'm not familiar with the books, but like, I have read the wikis and I haven't seen anything promising on the wiki, so I'm assuming the books as well. Within the actual media of G1, there are implications you can read into, but never once does it state for any character that they are canonically queer. That's just a fact. Like, I understand people have headcanons, and we're going to get into the Garrett Sander debate here. But if you are looking specifically at the media and the like physical stuff from G1, no character is canonically queer. And it drives me absolutely fucking batshit when people say that they are. To clarify, I'm not talking about the like newer, like 2020 and onwards comics and like books and stuff that's going on, just because that is, to me, a little bit separate. I understand it's G1, but it does feel separate. We're just talking about the original because that's like what people argue. People argue that in G1, like Valentine was canonically gay. Claudine was canonically a lesbian. Was Valentine heavily implied to be gay based on his diary? Yeah, but like, it was never typed out, I'm gay. He never says in the movies, I'm gay. Like, it's not, to me, technically canon. It's just kind of an implication. And like, do I appreciate it? Maybe in some sense, but like, do I also kind of feel like it borders on, I mean, I guess it doesn't really border on queer baiting because it's not that overt, but like, I don't know. If it's not even overt enough to be called queer baiting, it's definitely not overt enough to be canon, I guess is my argument. So the reason that people argue that there is like different sexualities represented in G1 is because of like post media comments made by Garrett Sander, who is the creator of Monster High. A few things here. yes, he was the creator. He did not have 100% creative control over everything. So I'm not trying to even say that Garrett didn't want characters to be queer or gay or whatever like term you want to use. I would like to believe that like he genuinely did want to have that representation, but he wasn't allowed to by like CEO or like board members or whoever is like putting the kibosh on that, other members of the Monster High team. Like he wasn't allowed to do that is what he has said. And so good faith, I'll believe him. But that's it. He wasn't allowed to do it. So he has since confirmed in like tweets or lives or questions that people like go up to him and like ask him when they see him at conventions and stuff, oh, is such and such character this or that or the other? And like he has now confirmed, oh yeah, like Claudine was like a lesbian. Like I like to think of her as a lesbian. And that's fine and dandy. And I do think that it makes it like a super valid headcanon to have if the creator himself is like, oh, I like that concept. Like I would have gone with that, but it still doesn't make it canon to me. And I know that is like a divisive thing to say, but I just think that if it doesn't make it into the media itself, then it shouldn't count, because you can wish for something all you want, but a wish isn't necessarily reality. Maybe he wanted Claudine to be a lesbian, but if he wasn't allowed to do that, he wasn't allowed to do that. And I don't think that it's helpful to try to pretend that like retroactively she was canonically a lesbian. Like to me, it just isn't helpful. It's the same thing as all of the insane shit that J.K. Rowling has said about Harry Potter post books being canon. That's like, people don't really like to necessarily acknowledge it. And I'm only bringing up like that specifically just because I feel like Harry Potter has such a cultural significance and like awareness that like it's a reference that a lot of people will understand. She famously tweeted out that Dumbledore is gay, and like I think you can obviously make a huge argument for Dumbledore being gay, but like in the Harry Potter books, he didn't say anything about it. He wasn't in a relationship with another man, like overtly or anything like that. So again, it's just like, yeah, she said it. Does that really make it canon? And even like other crazy stuff, like the fact that before indoor toilets were invented, wizards would just like pee anywhere and then vanish it into nothingness. Like, it's not in the books. Is it canon because she said it? Personally, I mean, I don't really want to believe it, but I also just don't think to me, a canon is what gets to appear in the material. If I was writing a book and I wanted the main character to be a lesbian and my editor or publisher or whatever was like, no, actually you can't do that. And so the book got published and like there are little hints in there, but nowhere in the book does she like get to act and like actually express that she's a lesbian. Even like when they're ahead, like I'm not saying she has to be out or like in a relationship, but even if I can't have her internal dialogue be like, oh, I like girls and I'm a girl, that character to me isn't canonically a lesbian. Like I might want her to be, but if someone put the kibosh on it and it doesn't make it into print, that's not, to me, that's just not canon. And again, I know that that's not a popular opinion because people want representation. And I understand that. I understand wanting Claudine to get to be canonically a lesbian or Valentine to get to be canonically gay. Like I understand wanting that so desperately because I also love representation as a queer non-binary person. I want to see that. But if it's not true, it's not true. And the reason that I feel so strongly about this, and I have mentioned this before, is because I do think it is harmful to portray things as being more representative than they actually were. If they weren't representative when it actually came out, the experience of people watching that media and engaging with these dolls in real time was not a representative experience. And yeah, is it wonderful if X amount of years later, the creator confirms that that's what he wanted? Sure, but that doesn't change the fact that if you watch the media, it's not there, or the fact that for years leading up to that, it wasn't there. And I think that it is harmful for this whole myth when you go into like the race and the sexuality aspects. I think it is really harmful to look at a piece of media retroactively and say, oh yeah, well, this character was actually supposed to be this and this character was actually supposed to be this, because it gives people this idea that it was this beacon of diversity and representation, and it ends up being lauded. And realistically speaking, I think it should be criticized. And like, I know that sucks. I know that a lot of people aren't like me because I love to criticize the media that I like. It's part of the fun for me. I know that people aren't like that. Like I do understand that. And I understand wanting Monster High, something that means a lot to you, to like be representative. But I think it's harmful because the reality is that it wasn't like that. And so if we live in this world where Garrett Sander, now far removed from Monster High, doesn't even work for Mattel anymore, is not involved in like G3, for example, if he can just like retroactively recanonize everything and make it so much better, you end up thinking that G1 again was so much more diverse and so much more representative than it actually was. And it means that people then will like have that in their heads and they won't necessarily look at it critically, and then they won't see the reality, which is the fact that Mattel wouldn't let it be canonically queer. And I think that's something that's really important to recognize. Like retconning it to be like quote unquote canonically queer removes the opportunity to critique Monster High and Mattel for not letting him do that in the first place. Does that make sense? I hope that that's coming across correctly. But I just think that when we can like change things retroactively, even if it is the creator, like I understand he's the creator, I get it. But even if he's allowed to do that, then we're going to end up in a world where people think that Monster High G1 was extremely like representative for LGBTQIA folks and extremely representative diversity wise in terms of like race. And the reality is that the racial, like, what is the word I'm looking for? Representation isn't it. Like the racial, God, I'm completely blanking. I guess the point that I'm trying to say is that like the representation that we saw wasn't always good. Sometimes it was actively harmful. It wasn't always accurate. And then like the queer rep was actually non-existent. But people aren't going to realize that if things can just be changed retroactively. And I don't think that that leads us to a good point in growth, because if we are pretending that it was always this amazing thing and like always super diverse and like super queer and all this stuff, that rids us of the opportunity to say, this is where we started, this wasn't good, this is how we're improving. Because if you pretend that it was perfect, you can't necessarily improve upon that, and then the changes just become changes instead of being positive things. Because again, to kind of bring this all full circle, I understand that still G3 isn't perfect representation wise, and I'm perfectly happy to say that, because that's just the truth. Especially like I said with Laguna, not everyone thinks that she's good representation, and we need to hear those voices. But the issue comes in when you're pretending that G1 was like canonically queer and super diverse racially. Then you see G3 and you're like, oh, they just made all these changes for no reason and it's weird. And that's not helpful, because in reality, G1 has a lot more racial diversity, and most of it is, from what I've seen, like from people who are of those cultures, more positive than what we saw in G1. Granted, that could change as G3 goes on, but thus far it is. And we actually do have explicit queer representation. Frankie is non-binary and in a sapphic relationship with Cleo. Cleo was also with Deuce at one point. So like, I haven't seen season 2, so I could be behind on this, but you could speculate that she's like bisexual or pansexual representation there, or maybe she doesn't want to put a label on it and she's just kind of queer. That's fine too. Like, that is actual canon, stated, seen representation. And if you look at G1 as it actually was, you can see that that's a change in the right direction when it comes to representation. Again, not necessarily perfect, but it's a positive change. Whereas if you pretend that G1 was perfect already, suddenly it just feels like change for no reason. So I think that's, I guess, where like the problem lies, is because it recontextualizes things in the current moment. And I think it rids us of the opportunity for positive change. So sorry, that was really heavy. I know we got really intense there at the end. I just feel really strongly about this. And I do think it's for a good reason. Because again, it's not me trying to be like, oh, you should totally love G3 and shit on G1. I also love so much of Gen 1. It started my doll collecting journey. It will always have an extremely special place in my heart. But I don't think it's helpful to pretend the things that we love are always perfect. I guess that's like maybe the best way to round out this video. I understand, again, as I said, like, while for me it's fun to critique the things I love, I understand that for other people it might be hurtful to see things that they love not be everything they want them to be. But pretending that they are, I just personally don't think is helpful, and I think that it makes things stagnate. I think criticism serves a purpose outside of just me having fun with it. But I think it genuinely does serve like an actual purpose. Like if there was ever a G4 of Monster High, maybe now it will be even more queerly representative, or maybe they'll be even more careful when they are like discussing race with the characters to make sure that characters aren't stereotypes. But if we pretend G3 is perfect, the hypothetical future G4 isn't going to have that building block to like go off of and to improve upon. So even G3, like again, like I'm critiquing G1, not to say that G3 is perfect, but it's just to say that I do think when it comes to that diversity and representation, it is an improvement. And I think we can keep improving, and we can't keep improving if we pretend that there aren't problems. So yeah, again, that was a lot, sorry. But I do think it was important and interesting to round out the video. I hope y'all enjoyed. I don't even know where to go from here. I'm such a shit to myself. I do this all the time where I'm like, let's talk about something really serious. And then I want to like be able to have a happy little bubbly ending and it's all awkward. So I do apologize for that. But hopefully you got something out of the discussion today. Maybe you learned something with these myths. Obviously, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, both with like the less serious stuff. Maybe like you didn't know things like the SDCC set not being an SDCC set, or like the heavier topics we discussed towards the end. I would obviously love to hear your input on that. But yeah, I've been filming for a hot minute. I'm tired and my throat is dry, so I'm gonna go. Like I said, I hope you guys were able to enjoy or at least get something out of this video. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.